The X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, rel-mar McConnell Media Company, the X Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And good evening, one and all. This is the X Zone, and I am Rob McConnell. And for the next 40 minutes, well, that's taking the commercials out, I'm going to be your host and your guide as together we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And, I've been doing this show now for 28 years, going on 29 years, and my experience is that fact is stranger than fiction. And we come to you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until 2 a.m. Eastern right here on the X Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Simul Radio, Simul TV, and iHeartRadio, and our good friends at Talkstar Live. If you'd like to check out our website with all our radio listings of programming we have available for you 24/7, 365, visit www.xzbn.net, and for the listing of the X Zone TV channel on Simul TV, simultv.com. My guest this hour, X Zone Nation, is author Todd Murray. He is a member of Laurentian University's Neuroscience Research Program and a leader in studies on the meeting of science and religion. Professor Murphy has also published on anthropology of spiritual experiences and the evolution of mysticism in human history. His studies in the neuroscience of spirituality began in 1985. In 1998, his work began to be published in academic journals. Professor Murphy is also the author of Sacred Pathways, The Brain's Role in Religious and Mystic Experiences, with forewords by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and Dr. Michael Persinger. Joining me now is Professor Todd Murphy. And Todd, welcome to the X Zone.
Nice to be here.
Great having you with us. Tell me, what was your inspiration for writing your latest book entitled Deja Vu and Other Spiritual Gifts?
My inspiration was simply that I wanted to take all the things that I had learned in my larger studies that could be practiced immediately by people. A lot of the work that I've done, especially in the book you mentioned, Sacred Pathways, the one with the foreword by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, is kind of on the theoretical side, and that's very important for integrating spirituality into evolutionary thinking, Darwinian thinking. But along the way, I learned some things and acquired some spiritual learning before I went on that track that people could simply apply. So I wanted to make a very practical guide to exploring one's spiritual gifts, doing magic, if we can call it that, in a real way. So that the book, Deja Vu and Other Spiritual Gifts, is very much a practical how-to guide without a lot of commentary about how it integrates into the larger picture of human spirituality, human evolution, and indeed the nature of human beings.
So is it really... I'm sorry, sir.
So it's kind of what you might call a grimoire, a book of magic.
Right. Is it really possible to acquire magical powers?
Well, I would say yes, but there's a couple of caveats to that. One is that no magical power that cannot contribute to the evolution or survival of a human society is likely to exist.
Okay.
And it's important to say that a lot of the magical powers that people might think of are in fact entirely fictitious. Our impression of what superhuman abilities is like has been so fashioned, I might even say battered, by the media and Hollywood, that it's hard to know what's practical and what's not. No one is ever going to fly like Superman does. In fact, if you look at the world's spiritual literature, the New Testament, the tales of Jesus, the accounts of the Buddha's miracles, for example, you're not going to find anyone putting on magical tights and flying.
No, but there are people who walk across water.
There are a number of accounts, yes. In fact, one of my own spiritual teachers from years back, he died in the late 80s, I believe. He is supposed to have walked on water. And there were a number of witnesses. I never met any of them, but that was the story that I heard. So if we look at magical powers in the context of our early evolutionary history, the time when our evolution rendered us as the species we are now, and ask what kind of spiritual abilities, magical abilities might have benefited them, then we come to a much smaller number of them, but they're all much more, how can I put it, practical. They're easy to imagine. And the accounts of such abilities far outnumber the accounts of people who, say, are so supposed to have levitated. So, for example, psychic abilities,
right,
especially remote viewing, would be a very useful skill in our early evolutionary history and would have contributed to our survival substantially. So if you have a shaman who has the ability to remote view at a time when his tribe or his clan is short on food, then the ability to cast his mind about and locate a herd of buffalo or a stand of deer or even a very lush forest glade where there might be edible roots that could be dug up. That would be a very useful ability. The tribe is starving. We have to do anything we can in order to find food. And in a moment like that, the ability to remote view becomes a solid gold skill.
But
in fact, remote viewing is one of the few spiritual or psychic abilities that governments have put substantial money into. It may be that the scientific community rejects remote viewing as so much nonsense,
right,
but the CIA, who is smart enough to put money into things that appear to be working and withdraw it from things that don't, has been putting money and resources and skilled individuals into remote viewing for decades. They're not turning away from it. They're not looking for a stand of buffalo where the people can get food. They're looking for missile silos and such things. But the core ability to focus on what you need to find and then find it this way is the same in both cases. Another one, perhaps even more important, is the ability to do something like spiritual healing. And I hope we can get into that a little deeper further on. But if people in a tribe are sick and they need to be healed, then the ability to put your hands on them and make them better, healing by laying on hands, becomes a survival skill, not a psychic skill. And in the very first generations of human beings, let's say the first 2, 3, 5 generations, before we had learned which plants in our environment had medicinal powers, we had nothing to rely on except this one ability to put your hands on someone, go into the appropriate state of consciousness, and through a kind of, well, I'll be blunt, magical ability to initiate their immune system and facilitate their recovery. Our early populations were small, 20, 30, 50 people tops, some anthropologists guess. And in a case like that, an epidemic, I mean, even a serious destructive flu going through the community could be enough to wipe them out. So healing by laying on hands isn't a magical power. For our early ancestors, it was a survival power. Another one is empathetic skills. When we emerged as a species, we relied on culture and relating to other people as our survival strategy, our evolutionary strategy. And the ability to look at another person and see how they're feeling and even be able to guess with reasonable accuracy what they're thinking allowed interpersonal relationships to flow so much smoother. And that would only help to cement the culture and the social group in which we all lived. So the mother looks at the baby and knows what the baby wants or what it needs, knows what makes it happy. We didn't need to ask. In our very early histories, our very first generations, our languages were not as sophisticated as we are now. And we didn't have the rich vocabulary for talking about our emotional states. So simply to look at a person and know that they're in pain, that they're happy, that they're hungry, that they're sleepy, or whatever, and be able to respond to their needs fluidly was also a survival skill, not guaranteeing the survival of individuals, but the survival of the social group that they all relied on for their individual survival.
Professor, please stand by. You and I have to take our first break. Exonation, our guest this hour, is author Professor Todd Murphy, and the website is www.spiritualbrain.com, and the name of his latest book is Deja Vu and Other Spiritual Gifts. My name is Rob McConnell. This is the X-Zone, and we're coming to you around the world from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't forget, you can get your complimentary copy of the X Chronicles newspaper simply by going to www.xchroniclesnewspaper.com. And for all the broadcast shows that we have on our radio side, xzbn.net. I'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away. Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone radio show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone broadcast network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV. Plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
We live in rapidly shifting times of extreme volatility and uncertainty. Such profound change brings a unique opportunity for the evolution of consciousness. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, host of Mission Evolution Radio Show, a program that explores the latest scientific developments and deepening spiritual truths supporting human evolution. Join me on XZBN.net, where I interview leading experts in science, physics, medicine, spirituality, and more. By applying divergent viewpoints to leading-edge topics, we uncover expansive and evolutionary truth to assist you on your path to enlightenment. More information and past episodes are available at missionevolution.org.
Welcome back, everyone. Professor Todd Murphy is our special guest. He's the author of Deja Vu and Other Spiritual Gifts. His website is spiritualbrain.com. Let me ask you this, Professor. As a neurologist and as a scientist yourself, how do you explain the workings of remote viewing?
Well, this is a question that ultimately comes down to physics. So I'm the wrong person to ask. We brain scientists, we know lots of good things, and I'll go on record publicly here saying that brain scientists are good boys and girls. But the question of how we can actually take information from one area and bring it into the conscious awareness of a mind in another area is a matter of physics. Now, the best evidence that I've seen, some of which comes from Dr. Michael Persinger's experiments at Laurentian University in Sudbury, Ontario. I believe he's been on your program a couple of times.
Yes, he has.
Tells me that the medium of transmission appears to be the Earth's magnetic fields. So, I'm sorry, that's singular, Earth's magnetic field. So, the information that's present in a locale that you're trying to remote view needs to get into your head. And assuming that there is a pattern, a repository for the information in the place you're trying to remote view, as, for example, a person or even an animal that's there, an animal with a functioning brain and nervous system, that information can be transmitted through the Earth's magnetic field and received by someone who is skilled or experienced in picking up that kind of subtle information.
So can we say that the Earth's magnetic field acts as the very first internet for thought transference?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
There's a story. It comes from the bush people of the Kalahari Desert. I guess you and your listeners will have gathered by now that in spite of my background in neuroscience, I'm very interested in anthropology and cultural evolution. But there was an anthropologist out visiting the Kalahari bush people. They're now called bush people instead of bushmen. And he noticed that the women were carrying their babies around in slings. And the babies were always clean, and the slings were always clean. So he asked a mother, in the very direct language of the Kalahari bush people, what do you do when your baby has to shit? And the woman said, oh, well, we take it out in the bush, meaning take it away from the camp. And he said, oh, okay, well, that makes good sense. Wait a minute. How do you know when your baby has to shit? And the woman said, oh, something like, silly white man, how do you know when you have to shit? It was as though the information in the baby's mind, reflecting its current state of consciousness, was directly accessible to the mother's perception. So when that heavy lower abdominal sensation appeared that said it's time to go to the bathroom, the mother picked it up and may even have projected it onto her own body. But the information from her own intestines, colon, and all the excretory system would have been quite differently nuanced than the information coming from her baby. So she would recognize it as coming from the baby, take it out into the bush, let it do its thing, clean it up, and then bring it back. And et voila, clean baby, clean sling, no accidents. So this would be a very simple example of how magnetic field information could be transferred from one person to another. So and the same thing can also happen in lots of other contexts.
So where does ESP fit into this entire picture then, if we're talking about the electromagnetic grids that are around the Earth, being the way that these messages get from point A to point B?
Right.
And at Duke University, you know, they've conducted many experiments on ESP, and if it was transference from one spot to the next, how would you explain the experimentation that's been used with Zener cards?
Well, one possibility, I mean, you're asking me to be very, very speculative here. And there's no way that I would promise you now that I can stand by the answer I give you now over the long term.
Understood.
But suppose you have a card.
Yes.
And the card has wavy lines on it. Each time a person picks that card up and looks at it, they think, oh, wavy lines. They see the card with a circle, they look at it, and they recognize it as a circle. Now, over time, assuming there is even the tiniest amount of ferrous material in the makeup of the cards, even the most insignificant groups of iron filings, for example, then that card could begin to bear a magnetic charge that would give the information for what's on it. So when a remote viewer in another room is trying to figure out what the card says, there is actually some kind of informational imprint there for them to hook onto. Then there's the possibility that remote viewing actually involves remote viewing. That is to say, through using the Earth's magnetic field, they're able to take a portion of the magnetic component of their consciousness and place it at a distance, because there's nothing that keeps all the information in our brains within our heads.
Okay.
So this opens up a can of worms called non-local consciousness, and I try to stay away from it. The evidence that I and Dr. Persinger have been handling as we develop these kinds of hypotheses hasn't really involved an awful lot of card guessing, but there were some studies done in the early 90s, and I would have reviewed them before this program if I'd known they were going to come up, where the accuracy of card guessing correlated with changes or states of the Earth's magnetic field.
Interesting.
So there would appear to be some kind of plausible correlation there. But the actual mechanism that gets from the perceiver to the design printed on the card still has some mysterious aspects about it.
I understand that remote viewers have been used to find downed aircraft. I believe his name is Curly, who was brought in by the Canadian government to help look for an aircraft that crashed up north. How would a remote viewer locate a crashed aircraft that has no ability to send back a signature on a magnetic grid?
The Earth's magnetic field is already the grid and already picking up any magnetic information that's present at the site.
Gotcha. Okay.
There's simply no way to stop it. In fact, if you have several magnetic fields that are related to one another, you don't have several magnetic fields. The fact that they're relating or exchanging magnetic force or magnetic moment, kind of a magnetic analog to momentum, means that you don't have 3 or 4 magnetic fields anymore. You have one magnetic field with several loci, several centers of the magnetic force.
How does this work then with people who have out-of-body experiences?
Quite a different subject, actually.
Okay.
I wouldn't try to use anything that explains one to explain the other. But when people have out-of-body experiences, there are a couple of possibilities. One is that they're hallucinating the environment that they're in from an out-of-body perspective. That is to say, they're perceiving everything exactly as they would if they were not having an out-of-body experience, and the hallucination is of them being present in a different location in space. The second possible mechanism, and there's no reason that both couldn't happen in different cases, is that their consciousness is actually out of their bodies. Now, the brain has about 5 million organically produced magnetite crystals per gram, and there's about 1,400 grams in the average human brain. So that's a lot of magnetic work, a lot of magnetic processes going on in the brain.
Right.
So if the brain's electrical activity were to stop, as happens in near-death experiences, there's no reason to assume that the magnetic component of consciousness would necessarily lose its coherency. It could be freed from its position inside our heads because there's no longer any electrical activity there to support it, for it to interact with. And then the person's consciousness would be outside of their bodies. I've read lots of accounts of out-of-body experiences in which the person actually felt they had what they call a subtle body. Now, if you can have an out-of-body hand, why can't you have an out-of-body brain?
It's a good theory, but how can we prove it?
Well, I think it's all right. But certainly there are out-of-body experiences where the person reporting the experience missed certain details of the event for which they were out of their body, usually in near-death experiences. But on the other hand, that's remembering an event. And there are lots of cases where people don't remember events that happened to them when they were in normal states of consciousness accurately.
All right, Professor, please stand by. You and I have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Exo Nation, our guest this hour is Professor Todd Murphy. He is the author of Deja Vu and Other Spiritual Gifts. His website is spiritualbrain.com. And the professor and I will return on the other side of this commercial break with the news as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, X-Zone Radio TV, and check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/X-Zone Radio TV.
Can you hear me?
From our broadcast studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, to the world and beyond, you're watching the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
AVS Media Den.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world, interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com. Welcome back, everyone. Professor Todd Murphy is our special guest. His website is spiritualbrain.com, and his book is entitled Deja Vu and Other Spiritual Gifts. Before we went to in the last segment, sir, we were talking about magnetism, and you mentioned something about the magnetic components that are in the brain, and the amount of magnetic components that we were talking about was quite staggering.
Yes, and it's actually a long-established scientific fact. It was first published in 1992.
Ooh. What happens then if somebody goes and has an MRI, which is magnetic? Wouldn't the magnetism or the magnetic components in the person's brain affect the outcome of the MRI, or how does the MRI compensate for that?
Well, neither, really.
Okay.
You see these magnetite crystals in the brain. They're organized in chains. The chains are called magnetosomes, and the few images that I've seen show about a dozen magnetite crystals all lined up in, I won't call them neat rows, but they're kind of laid out in a line, curving lines always. And the amount of magnetic fields that it would take to break them up is probably very, very much higher than their normal operating magnetic field strength. So when an MRI happens, it wouldn't necessarily break them up or interrupt the magnetic component. Now, if the magnetic component is there as an adjunct to the brain's electrical activity, because according to Maxwell's equations, whenever you have an electric current, you also have a magnetic field. And whenever you have a moving magnetic field, you generate an electric current. So I don't know that it would have enough force to interrupt that process.
Interesting.
Certainly the magnetic, the electrical activity would continue, largely unaffected. I've never had an MRI, but I once had a session using a very strong magnetic field from a device. At this moment, the name escapes me. It was many years ago.
No, the reason I asked you that was I had an MRI many years ago. In fact, I've had a number of them over my years. And as soon as you said that, it started to, well, wait a second, when magnetic poles of the same come in contact with each other, they repel. So I was just wondering that, and I thank you very much for answering. Let's talk about your book, Deja Vu and Other Spiritual Gifts. In your book, you talk about the third eye. For our listeners who may not know what the third eye is, can you explain it to them?
Well, the third eye is almost a metaphor for the ability to access vision from within one's brain or within one's mind, vision that is not coming from the physical world around us. So you close your eyes, and ordinarily what you see is a kind of dull, dark inside of your eyelids, unless you're in a very bright place. And what I take the metaphor, the third eye being, is a metaphor for the vision that comes from within.
I see.
And the trick to opening the third eye, as I describe in my book that you just mentioned, is to separate one's inner vision from one's physical eyes. And the way to do that is a simple technique. You close your eyes, you point your eyes downward a little bit, and a little bit below the center of your visual field horizontally, but you put your attention on a spot that's a little above it, so that your vision, your total visual system, is no longer receiving information from your eyeballs. And the only other place for it to come from is from the brain's inner imaging system, which appears to depend on the hippocampus, a brain structure on the right side. And it's responsible for all sorts of nonverbal ways of thinking, inner imagery, including the kind that comes up in dreams or hallucinations. So once you can receive visual information and be conscious of visual information from within your own mind, then you have only to direct it to what you want to perceive. And depending upon the level of skill and how much you've exercised it, meaningful information can come up.
We talked briefly about psychic phenomena, and I was wondering if there was a way that people could actually learn how to be psychic.
Yes, I think there is. And the way to do it appears to be simply a matter of attention. that if you think of something, anything, or let's make it a little more straightforward and say you think of a particular person,
right,
and you have a visual thought of that person, there's a very good chance that that visual thought appearing in response to your conscious thought, which may involve a word, say their name, that can often be an indication of what that person is doing right then at that moment. So you'd be remote viewing them. The difference between a person with an open third eye, to stay with the classical metaphor, and other people is that the person with the open third eye has simply learned to pay attention to the initial images that come up when they think of a person or a thing. So opening your third eye, acquiring psychic abilities, is not a matter of developing an internal eyeball, but rather being able to pay attention to images that don't come from your two physical eyes. In my book, I make the somewhat dull witticism, the joke, that the reason it's called the third eye is because it isn't the first two. So just paying attention to the first flash of the first visual flash that comes in response to thinking of someone, being reminded of someone,
right,
can often be meaningful. Now, the way that I first understood this, and I've talked to a few psychics about it, lifetime psychics. One of them was in his 80s when we had the conversation, and they confirmed it, was that I was visiting a woman in her new home. She had just moved in, and she was into positive thinking. So she wanted to say that everything about her new home was absolutely perfect and everything that she had visualized. And she said, well, there's only one thing. And before she could correct herself to say, no, nothing's wrong, it's all perfect, I had an instant flash of fireworks in my mind. It was quite vivid. And I said, so she'd said, except for one thing, and I turned to her and I said, fireworks? And her jaw dropped, because what she'd been doing was a kind of private devotional ritual in which she would create a small fire in a square of bricks, and then once the fire had burned down, she would take bath salts and throw them into the flames, onto the hot coals, doing whatever mantra or recitations or prayers had come to her. And then she would watch the bath salts burn, and they did so with different colors.
Right.
She said, how could you know that? I said, I didn't know that, but when you said there was only one thing that you wished you had here, that was the first image that came to mind. And she said, those classic words, oh, you must be psychic. And, of course, at that time I wasn't. But I've since learned that if I am thinking about something or someone and I have a strong visual flash about them, that I should treat the information in it as though it were true. And most of the time it works out for me.
So if we can teach people how to be psychic, can we also teach people how to be spiritual healers?
Yes, but the techniques are very different. My spiritual teacher, who was a faith healer, as they're called, taught me the basics of the technique, and I've been able to apply it a number of times. Now, I don't hang out a shingle or put ads in the newspaper saying that I'm a spiritual healer or a psychic or anything like that. My vocation is in neuroscience. So I don't get a lot of people knocking on my door for this, but I've applied it, and it's worked.
How have you applied it, sir?
The technique is simply to imagine that there are holes in the palms of your hands. And when you exhale, some diaphanous, cloudy, vague stuff comes out. And when you inhale, that same thing comes back in. And you put your hands on the person, on the place that you want to heal, assuming that it has a location. Not all health issues do.
Right.
If they don't, you put your hands on their head. And then while you're doing that, two other techniques come into play. One of them is imagining that there's a presence around you, someone or something that's contributing to the process. And the second is to attain as strong emotional state as you can. So that if you're trying to heal a person, you put your hands on the spot that hurts, You imagine that there is a being, and if it appears to you to be an angel, then you let it be an angel. If it's a saint, then you let it be a saint. If it's Jesus, then you let it be Jesus. Whatever it kind of wants to be, you let it be. You don't try to direct or control that. And then, remembering that you're trying to remove someone's pain, and this gets a little paradoxical, put yourself into as strong an emotional response to their pain as you can manage. The most effective healers that I've ever talked to have all said that an effective healing tears their heart out. And for a little while after it's over, they need some recovery time. My spiritual teacher in this area, who was called Carmu, he lived in Boston, died in the late 80s, used to actually have to close his eyes and disappear. And after I'd been visiting him a number of times, because I had an illness at the time, he said that when he does that, he would actually go out of his body.
Wow.
And
Professor, we have to take our
what
break.
He called the energy.
We have to take our final break. Please stand by, sir. Exonation,
Sorry?
our guest this hour is Professor Todd Murphy. His website is spiritualbrain.com, and the name of his book is Deja Vu and Other Spiritual Gifts. And we'll be back on the other side of this break, wrapping up this hour here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world, interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
The new nonfiction book, Razor of Madness, is similar to cult movies like Clockwork Orange, Dragon's Tattoo, or The Other Side of Hell. Wayne Morin Jr. and Thomas Lee Howe will expose widespread and systematic deficiencies in this thought-provoking tell-all novel. Mind control rages among scholars in law schools. Human rights are ignored while thought reform and mental manipulation are accepted practices used as behavior modification. Dr. Louis Jolyon West comes to mind. Media and public scrutiny shows that United States mental hospitals are in fact destructive murder industries. Razor of Madness expose novel details this epidemic through an in-depth professional and personal investigation. For decades, there has been a revolving door policy that still releases killers and pedophiles back into society. The maestro of mind control continues to haunt America to this very day. Razor of Madness is available in paperback or as a downloadable ebook at Amazon.com.
The concept of a new age has been around since the late 19th century, yet much of its original meaning has been lost. What exactly is the new age? Is it a religion, a collection of obscure esoteric practices, a series of doomsday predictions, or an astrological event? The New Age Chronicles is a unique, complementary publication bringing reason and grounded information to separate fact from fiction. Chock full of valuable information to support you as we make the monumental shift into the new era. You won't want to miss a single innovative issue. The New Age Chronicles newspaper is coming soon to www.newagechronicles.com.
And welcome back. This is the final segment with our guest this hour, Professor Todd Murphy. He is the author of Deja Vu and Other Spiritual Gifts. His website is spiritualbrain.com. Before we went to the break, sir, we were talking about your spiritual teacher. And what more can you tell us about him? How did he mentor you? How did he teach you to do the work that you're doing today?
How did he teach me? Well, by example, with the occasional explanation. Carmu was in his, I believe, early 80s when I was with him. I was in his house. I had an illness. I was going to him every day. Sometimes he would explain things. Sometimes he would demonstrate. And one of his most powerful techniques, which I saw him do scores of times, was praising people. You could walk into the room to see him, and he would instantly look at you and know that you were sick, that you weren't just a visitor, you were actually there for healing. He could tell. And before he would start to work on them, sit them down, give him his medicines, which very small repertoire of medicines, he would talk to them. And he'd look at them and say something like, "You look like that movie star. In fact, you look like you could be 6 movie stars all rolled into one. My third eye is opening. Someone get me some sunglasses. This man is a holy man. This man is a healer." He will walk on the ceiling and sing songs while he does so. One of these days, wherever he goes, the blind will see, the deaf will hear, the crippled will throw away their crutches and walk shouting hallelujah. He will be a God-given son for the rest of his days. Children are going to write essays in school about why they want to grow up to be just like him. He would keep this up, and he could be unrelenting and never repeat himself.
So why would he do that?
And eventually, this avalanche of praise and avalanche of hopeful thoughts would begin to have an effect on the person, and no matter how sick they were or what was wrong, they would start to smile, they would laugh, they would achieve a positive moment, and it was in that moment that he would begin to work on them.
It sounds like something Dr. Patch Adams would do.
Yes, except Patch Adams, when it came to this sort of thing, Patch Adams was an amateur. Carmu was just so powerful in this technique that he could, I believe, that he could actually impose something of his consciousness and presence onto the person while he was doing it.
No disrespect, Professor, but everybody's heard of Dr. Patch Adams, and not very many people that I'm aware of have heard of your spiritual mentor. That's why I use the Patch Adams analogy.
I understand, but the reason that I emphasize it is that I've learned in the years since Carmu passed away that it takes skill and practice to do it. You have to think of positive things to say to people. You have to cultivate that as a technique. Compliment people wherever you go, whatever's happening. Forbid yourself from ever putting someone down. It's an extremely rigorous discipline, and there's nowhere to learn it except to just relate to people and be as positive as you can. I mean no disrespect to Patch Adams, of course.
How can people use deja vu in their spiritual lives?
Well, you kind of have to play the part of a hunter. You wait until a moment of deja vu appears spontaneously. I've never heard of anyone encountering a technique to force it to happen. There are very few people that I've heard of who can make it happen when they want to, but I've never heard any of them explain a technique for it. It's just kind of a thing they do in their minds. But once that moment appears, you have to avoid the usual temptation to compare the present moment to your memories of the past. I define deja vu as the perception that the present moment is a recurrence of a moment in the past. And instead of focusing on what moment in the past the present moment might recapitulate, instead of searching your memory, you stay completely focused with the present. Instead of thinking of the past and trying to remember, you stay present in the present moment.
Well, but
allow that feeling of pastness to run its course.
Is there a difference between coincidence, synchronicity, and deja vu?
Well, synchronicity. The way I use the terms, no, but
Okay.
A moment of synchronicity could easily trigger a moment of deja vu.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. How can people talk to their animals? I mean, besides being Dr. Doolittle.
Well, the way to do it is to focus on the animal and think in pictures. I had an incident many years ago. I had it happen again quite recently, but the one years ago is clearer. This was a cat that kept bringing things into the house. A mouse's head.
Mm-hmm.
This was in Northern California, and it would bring in these little scorpions. They're not the deadly kind that you have in the Himalayas and in Saudi Arabia, but they can sting you, and they really hurt. I got stung once or twice myself. So it was bringing in all these dead animals, and it grossed everybody out. And when it brought a scorpion in that wasn't quite dead, nobody knew what to do about it. So there happened to be a completely empty room in the house. So I took the cat, brought it into the room, set it on the floor, closed all the doors, looked at the cat, focusing on it, and allowed an image of a scorpion into my head. And then immediately conjured up a blast of anger from myself. So look at cat, remember scorpion, blast of anger. The message communicated is, we are angry that you're bringing in scorpions. Do the same thing with a dead mouse. We're angry that you're bringing dead mice in. Do the same thing with any other critters that might come up. And the cat eventually began to roll around on the floor, emitting this very pained sort of purr and growl. And eventually I got the feeling that the message had been communicated. The whole thing took maybe 3 minutes, and then I let the cat out of the room, and that was the end of it, and the cat never brought in another dead critter ever again. 2 days ago, I was sitting on my porch having a cup of tea, and a cat went by, and I thought it would be nice to pet the cat. So I focused on the cat and then imagined the sensation of me being scratched behind my ears. And this cat that had walked by many times and never paid the slightest attention to me suddenly appeared next to me and put his head down, leaning it forward and exposing the place behind its ears, whereupon I scratched behind its ears. I said to the cat, in this psychic language of imagery and sensation, imagined sensation, "Come on over, cat, and I'll scratch behind your ears." And that's exactly what happened. Now, I don't keep pets, so I don't have a lot of opportunity to communicate with animals, but I've spoken to a number of people, including one Native American shaman woman, a medicine woman.
Right.
And she said, yep, that's how you do it, all right. That's what my grandmother told me. That's what we do. And I said, well, how come nobody knows about it if it's that easy to describe? And she just shrugged and said she had no idea. But, you know, white people write the books, and white people aren't so open to this, so while it was never a secret, it was just something that wasn't talked about.
Why do you think this kind of spirituality is so popular these days?
A difficult question. I think it's partly because of the changes in contemporary and alternative spirituality that have happened over the past decades.
Right.
In the 70s and 80s, we saw a lot of spiritual teachers that promised things like enlightenment. After that, we had a wave of teachers that talked about the cultivation of compassion, and some who spoke about spiritual healing. And all of those things have come and gone. Remember the crystal craze?
Sure.
Books like Crystal Enlightenment and Crystal Ascendancy and so forth. And people got their crystals and they didn't get enlightened. They bought the book and they read the book, but they did not become ascended masters. And I think that there is a new openness to techniques that don't promise so much, but have their origins in the world's shamanic traditions, so that because they stand the test of time, hundreds of thousands of years, there's a good chance that that people are going to be able to get something out of it. Also, there is a new emphasis on love and compassion, and spiritual techniques that are founded on shamanic principles come from traditions where although it's rarely articulated openly, people need to love each other, protect each other, and do the best they can for one another to cement the communities they live in.
Isn't that called being a family and being a good neighbor?
I agree completely.
You know, John Lennon and many musicians throughout the years have always said all you need is love.
Yes, that's right. And love is at the center of nearly all effective shamanic traditions. Spiritual healing works best when you love the person you're trying to heal, so that emotional intensity can appear. I love this person. I don't want them to get sick. I don't want them to die.
Professor, unfortunately, our time for tonight has run out. I want to thank you so much for joining us. And Exonation, if you'd like to find out more about Professor Todd Murphy, visit his website, spiritualbrain.com, and the name of his book is Deja Vu and Other Spiritual Gifts. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada.
Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses by Brad Olson, consummates the lifeology story about where humanity originates. It is the lost continents, the primitive wisdom, the mythos of creation, and the rethinking of ancient history as we are taught in academia. There is much more to the story than what we have been told. As this is the first book in the Esoteric series, Modern Esoteric starts at the beginning of time and accelerates up to this modern age. Future Esoteric is book 2 in the series and takes a forward-looking position ahead of today with an open and honest examination of the ET issue and various unexplained phenomena. To discover the writings of author Brad Olson, visit www.bradolson.com. That's www.bradolson.com. Are you or is someone you know struggling with addictions, depression, anxiety, relationships, low self-esteem, lack of confidence, grief, success, and prosperity? Do you know that your subconscious belief plays a big role in the outcome of your hard work? We can help you permanently change the beliefs that may be the reason for your struggles and failures. We care about getting you the return on your investment and the results you are looking for. We can help you be free of the limitations of your past and in realizing your highest potential. We work with people by phone and Skype. For more information, visit us at www.ritasoman.com. That's www.ritasoman.com. Do you think you have energy problems in your home? Do you feel better when you're away than when you're home? Joey Korn is a global leader in the world of dowsing who specializes in personal energy clearing and space clearing. He can help you create an ideal energy environment in your home no matter where you live in the world. Learn about his remote spiritual house cleaning services and much more at www.dowsers.com. You can get Joey's book, Dowsing, A Path to Enlightenment, as well as other dowsing books and tools, Kabbalah books, and Walter Russell books. Joey's work is really amazing. Go to dowsers.com right now. That's DOWSERS.com or call 1-877-DOWSING. That's 1-877-369-7464.